It's the Spill the Wine Show podcast, episode number 7 with your host, Leroy Wine Guy Guilford. And thank you all. Number 7, let's see, I think we've got like 2.5, 3 months under the belt right now. And you can hear some vehicles running back and forth because it's a lovely September 2nd. We're sitting right next to the vines that, yes, you know, over the years and of Wine Country Talk Radio and the recent times of Spill the Wine, I hang my hat at Chapin Family Vineyards, very proudly out by Lake Skinner in our Temecula Valley of the Southern California wine country. We're looking across the Syrah vines and the Cab vines at the beautiful hills, lovely weather, and yes, a lot of cars going by. It's that time of the day. So setting the stage there, you know what the background noises and some of the wind as it comes along. Now, one of the things I have always wanted to explore, find it so fascinating. Tell me if this is not true for you as well. You go into, I just say a grocery store, and you're looking at a big set of wine on the shelf, and you go, that is a very interesting label. You pick it up and go, wow, that's pretty cool. And then you look at another one and go, oh, that sounds like an interesting wine. You pull out and take a look at the label and go, gosh, I could create a label prettier than that. So we're going to explore that exact topic. What is it that makes a label click or not click? And what's the background behind that? So I have a guy who specializes in this. We've known each other for a while here in our Temecula wine country. He makes labels, and he'll correct me for anything I'm wrong on here. Makes labels through his company for a number of different wineries all over Southern California, but particularly in our Temecula Valley. And Paul, do it again. Your last name is
Van Olden.
Van Olden. You know what? He's got that Dutch blood in him. So, anyways, for all these years, he was in other industries, like so many people in this realm. And so, I want you, Paul, touch base of what causes a guy to go, you know what, I think I'll make labels for wineries. I mean, that's not exactly something somebody grows up when they're a kid and goes, you know, when I get older, I'm going to be a guy who makes wine labels for wineries.
Well, it didn't happen that way. But I was in the printing business.
Yes.
And I love wine. I've been coming to Temecula for, I'd say, since 1997. Mm-hmm. And just even before that, when there was only a few wineries out here.
Right. And of course, we've had explosive growth over the last 2 decades, massively.
56 wineries now.
Yeah.
And so on a Sunday, it just happened to be wine tasting at one of my wine club one of the wineries that I'm joined a wine club, and they were. I think I did business cards for them, and then they asked me, "Hey, do you do labels?" Mm-hmm. And one thing I learned early in the printing business was when a customer asks you if you do something,
you do it.
Whether you know or not, you say yes. And then you scramble like hell to try to figure out how to do it. So
don't want to lose that business. And it's a learning process.
No,
right?
especially with existing customers. You never tell them, even if you don't even know where to get it or how to do it, mm-hmm. you find out how to do it. Because the whole thing about this business is you network and you have people that can fulfill whatever need you have. Mm-hmm. So I told them, yes, I do them. And then that was on a Sunday. Monday morning I get up and I say, okay, what the hell did I get myself into?
No, back up a little bit because we were talking a little bit before, but you were with a big communications company before you decided to dive in and be a creative guy, right?
Right, yeah.
Why don't you talk a little bit about that?
I was with AT&T for almost a little over 20 years.
Wow. Mm-hmm.
And I was a telecommunications specialist on corporate accounts. So I would be with the account executive and do all the technical backup and all that. But I took make a long story short, I took the early retirement and decided to take the package and just figure out what else to do. So a friend of mine was in the printing business. He said, why don't you try it out? And I tried it out and I liked it. I learned a lot and went back to my roots and started cold calling, which I hadn't done in 20 years.
And anybody in sales knows that's where it happens, right? Knock on the door, find out who's the guy who makes the decision, right?
Exactly.
Yes.
And it was probably a good thing for me to do because I forgot the basics and how to get a customer, how to actually actively pursue them. So I did that with printing. From the ground up, basically no customers and handed out business cards, took back samples, gave them quotes, and just built it little by little. So
Now, so all those years in kind of a corporate structure, are there things that you still find that you draw on out of that, or are you like jumped into a whole new pond?
well, it was an entirely different industry. So the only thing that really could transfer over is just your customers are number one, basically,
Right.
and you take care of them no matter how small or big. I had national accounts, and it's the same thing. People are just people. Even if it's a $500,000 sale or a $50 sale, still be.
So I want to ask you now, because the name of your company, a lot of people will recognize this because there's been songs about it and people love to still travel the old road and so on, but it's called Route 66,
That's
correct?
right.
Yes. So
That's
why don't
right.
you give it, what was the inspiration? Because when I think of Route 66 here in Southern California anyways, I think of Rancho Cucamonga and Pomona, Ontario, all that valley up there that was oceans of vineyards for years, for almost 200 years.
That's
And
right.
good old Route 66 ran through the middle of all those vines.
That's
So
right.
is there a little connection there?
Yeah, it's like it was the corner of Foothill and Haven, where there was an old winery called the Virginia Dare Winery. Now it's a business park, but that was kind of like the, I guess, center point for the wine industry in Cucamonga. There was, I think, Biani, Galliano,
Guasti.
Guasti,
Yeah.
all those old names, and they were all kind of centered around Foothill Boulevard, which was Route 66.
Route 66, yeah.
So I thought, you know what, it's got a good name recognition. It has nothing to do with printing, but it brings it to a local level. So it's Inland Empire, Route 66, and it kind of just stuck.
So I'm going to interject on this point because he said Inland Empire. So yes, we do collect some folks who follow us from various parts of the United States and maybe even around the world, which is amazing.
Yeah.
Here in Southern California, yes, the Route 66 route out of LA runs through what we call the Inland Empire. And it's way out through the desert and then over to Arizona. And if you ever followed that on the map or drive it yourself sometimes, yeah, it kind of is the old route that Interstate 40 kind of runs along all across the United States. So everybody's like, oh, I know where Interstate 40 is. Yeah, well, follow the map and you'll see all the little adjunct side roads, like in the original movie by Disney, The Cars. The Cars was all about losing all the traffic off of Route 66.
Yeah, it goes from Santa Monica to Chicago.
Yep. Now, in deciding to create that name, where and how specifically, and you touched a little bit on it, but I mean, where was the original label? Do you remember that you went, oh gosh, I'm going to make a wine label for this company?
That was for my first customer, who's my first label customer,
Right.
was Oak Mountain.
Oak Mountain, right here in our
well,
Temecula Valley.
actually,
yes.
it was Oak Mountain wasn't even built yet. It was just
So the one was still
the
Temecula
cave.
Hills, or they hadn't built the caves. Into the
Yeah,
mountain
that's
there
when they
yet.
did the winery tasting room and all that was up there.
Right.
And then they built Oak Mountain later. But so I did business cards for them. I did other things for them. And they asked me, and I was a wine club member for many years, so since Temecula Hill. So that's when they asked me, do you do it? I said, yeah, of course I do it.
Now, I'm going to ask a loaded question. Grab your glass of wine. Yes, folks, we never do a show without sipping wine. So here, give a little
Cheers.
clink here. Yeah, you can hear it. Yes. I'm drinking Chapin Alianico, and he's having our lovely Chardonnay. And we're sitting
And it's
out here on a
delicious.
beautiful veranda. But so it's not necessarily a needed thing to be a wine lover to make labels for wine, or is it?
No, well, I would say it's not necessary, but
Right.
it helps
Yes, it helps a lot.
because you get really creative after a glass or two of wine.
Which is why we never go through a show without sipping a little wine. So,
Perfect, yeah.
well, now, would you not say that there's psychology involved in the wine label industry? Now, at a larger thing, because we're talking about the small craft and boutique kind of things, but let's visualize a store shelf and say your favorite grocery store, and you've got all kinds of wild labels out there, and then you have some really boring ones. So there's got to be some kind of sliding scale between the very flamboyant and the very plain Jane, and what goes into the whole dimension of what are you trying to communicate in a label.
Exactly. It's basic marketing. Like, how do you want to represent your wine? Because people do not, they have no idea what's inside the bottle. And I always said the first bottle is that the customer is going to be enticed by the label for the first bottle.
Right.
But then once they open it, and if they like it, that's going to entice them to buy the second bottle. So the label is just like the door that opens up, that gets them to go, hey, this is interesting, and pick up the bottle and look at the back. And I always encourage winemakers to put a little description or tasting notes. Some do, some don't.
Right.
But I always look at the tasting notes, and you can get really creative. I have some customers that are super creative, and I wish I had some examples, but some that can amazing descriptions and pairings and flavors descriptions that you have never heard before. And some just want it plain. They just want to say, no, this is our wine, and they do a generic and talk about the winery.
Well, and another thing I've found, and it's a show that I'm going to do in the not too distant future, in my old radio show, Wine Country Talk Radio, we used to do a show called What's in a Name. And the qualifications was it had to be priced under $20. It had to be pretty well found in almost any wine shelf you might look for. Okay, so well marketed. And it was centered around the flamboyance of the label, the flamboyance of the name, or the flamboyance of this description on the back of the bottle. And then we'd sip them in real time and judge them as to whether or not they earned the reputation.
Right.
Let's talk about the flamboyance of the description, because that doesn't necessarily always fit what's in the wine, right?
No. It's basically it's an opinion.
Right.
It's based an opinion of winemaker or other people that are involved in the winery,
Or involved in the marketing, if we're talking about higher volume
exactly.
things, yes.
And you have to take it with a grain of salt, because nobody has the same palate, of course.
Right.
So you're going to judge it differently, but you need a starting point.
So there are other things that go on in our industry from a regulation standpoint. And although you'd think, oh gosh, he creates this beautiful label, that's his job. But you're governed by a lot of special edicts federally.
Federally, yes.
Okay, because you've got the different entities like FTV and their adjunct agencies that oversee and have to approve the labels. So why don't you talk a little bit about that, because that's a critical one thing we know that has to be on all, at least in America and the U.S., all alcoholic beverages is the volume percentage.
Exactly.
I should say the percentage of alcohol by volume.
Right.
And it's always somewhere in, where you need magnifying glasses to read it.
That's a great you brought that up, because part of the TTB, which is the federal agency that approves the labels, is they have guidelines or rules for point size that you have to follow. So you, even though the alcohol looks small, it has to be at least 5 points.
Okay.
And that's how they regulate it. And the appellation has to be a certain point size. And so everything has of course, it's government, so it's regulated.
Right. Exactly.
Everything is regulated.
Right. Sizes
and appellations and all that. There has to be a recognized AVA. There's a lot of little things which I take it for granted now because I do it all the time.
Right. I'm going to interject because, yes, folks, you can hear real live, well, I would say live radio, but live podcasts, because we're here in wine country. And, there's a helicopter flying over us right now. So we're going to let it pass by as we're sipping wine and then talking about wine labels and how they allure you to pick a wine up off the shelf, no matter where it is, if it's a small craft boutique operation or, in your favorite wine retailer. It could be a Bevmo, it could be a Total Wines, it could be your favorite grocery store. There's all kinds of places, and those companies spend a lot of energy to get a wine into your hand for the first time, and that's the dimension we're talking to. Let's pick back up where we were talking about more on the regulations. So what, as opposed, is on the front versus the back label?
Well,
they regulate that?
There's both things. Some things have to appear on the front and back, and depends who you talk to and who you're dealing with at the TTB. There are definitely specifics for what goes on the front, what goes in the back, and what has to be on both sides, sizes, and you have to have all the specifications, size of the label. Everything has to be just perfect before the TTB to approve it.
And every time that you make any minor adjustment to a label, you may be changing a singular varietal. Let's use a case in point. Here at Chapin Family Vineyards, they went from the 2017 vintage Cabernet Sauvignon to the 2018 vintage, and even though the labels look they are identical, except for the change of the vintage, everything else, we still had to pay the fees to get them approve it before we can print it.
Exactly.
Yes.
You're always safer just doing it, getting it approved, no matter how small the changes are, and rather than having to go back and reprint them all.
So let's tackle some fun stories that you have relative to requests for various kinds of labels. So,
Yeah.
Personality of who is the operator of a winery or wine operation enters into the picture, and they like to have certain kinds of things portrayed. So tell us some of the stories out of that realm, maybe some of the wild and flamboyant stuff.
Well, I had one customer. I do a lot of smaller boutique, just people that make wine through other wineries, or they're just independent, and they have other wineries that are existing make their wine for them, and then so I have a lot of those independent customers like that. I had one guy, and he wanted a pinup girl on his label. And and he wanted a certain look, and some of the things we couldn't do because they would never get approved.
Right.
But then he decided the last couple of days, said, well, I probably won't sell it. I'll just keep it, because he wanted his pinup girl on there, and there were so many details that I won't get into now, but she had to look a certain way, had to show a little bit of this, a little bit of that, but it took a couple of months to get it down right. But that was the funniest one that I can remember, how the detail of just the girl had to be. But, that's just one of the things that customers just, they want to do something, Now, and there's also, and I because I know specifically, so we were talking about here in our Temecula Valley, for those that, if you haven't come out and had a chance to bounce around, you need to do so. But let's talk about Steve and Valerie there at Oak Mountain that you do a lot of work for. Yes,
I've known them for years, and she's a big dog nut,
Yeah,
right? So
yeah.
talk about, there's been some very special labels for her dog love, right?
Yeah,
So,
yeah. Her dog charity,
Right.
Cause for Paws.
Cause for Paws, right?
She donates a portion of the sales of that for every one of the dog labels. So we've done some from of her dogs, and just people that work there as dogs. And I don't do the design for the labels there.
Right.
They have a designer, but we'll format it and set it up however,
Right.
to get it printed. But they have a lot of dog themed labels, and they're the super dog friendly winery. So
Yes.
anybody with a dog, bring them there, and they'll feed them and give them water.
So let's talk about logistics, okay? Because we're yes, folks, and we are using a pun on purpose. But Paul was telling me that today things kind of went sideways. So any of you that ever saw the movie, yes, we're being very blatant. But he had a sideways day. And what are some of the crazy kind of sideways things you've run into? Because you end up with situations where somebody's got a bottling scheduled, and they need the labels by a certain time frame when the bottlers are going to be there.
Oh yeah.
So I mean, there's got to be some logistics into how long you have from designing it to getting it approved to getting it printed and back, because it's a physical thing. It's got to be there. You can't just like email it.
Yeah, there is a process, and there are deadlines, and there are proofs to be approved, and there are many things that go before they can be printed. And the customer has a definite bottling date, and you have to meet that date. I've delivered labels at nearly midnight sometimes because they're bottling at 6 in the morning, but something caused the production not to be done in the morning when it was supposed to be done. And, there's always press problems. I mean, whatever can go wrong can go wrong. It just...
So, and this is kind of a nuanced detail, but here I've had the opportunity to be a hand labeler more times than I care to speak of.
Yeah.
Because the bottling line broke down or something like that. Those big rolls, is there a standard size of how many labels, or do they give you?
It depends on the customer. Some want, usually it's 1,000 per roll on a 3-inch core, and that's the standard. But sometimes customers want a little larger, depending on what their machine, what their bottler or labeler can do. They prefer larger size rolls so they don't have to change rolls while they're bottling. So
unless you're a small operation like us, and you're going to be doing some hand labeling, you don't want a big, huge roll, right?
Exactly. So if you're doing all hand labeling, it doesn't,
So now, have you got any crazy stories like the one you were just talking about there? Well, we were talking about that going sideways today because we were texting back and forth, and you were battling traffic and that kinds of things. So you do a lot of direct delivery of the labels, is what I'm hearing. Is that correct? Yeah.
That's how I started with my printing business. I always deliver everything I can because that gives me an opportunity to see my customer, to ask for more business, or if there's something comes up, if you're in front of them, they will. It's better than just having FedEx or somebody drop it off, because while you're there, you can say, wait, hey, you need any of these, or can we do this for you, or, or...
So you're a Southern California-based company.
Yes.
Correct?
Yes.
I know you do a lot of work here in the Temecula Valley, but what are some of the areas that you reach out to? And do you do other beverages as well? So.
No, I haven't got... I've wanted to get into the craft beer, but I've been too busy to do that, frankly.
Well, that's kind of a good thing, is it not?
Yeah, no, I'm not complaining.
If they want all of your labels for the wine,
I'd want to get into that, but right now it's something that I've always put on the back burner, but I'll probably get into that pretty soon.
Right.
Yeah.
So are you doing other places like we mentioned out in the old Cucamonga Valley?
I do Galiana.
And even stuff in LIA and so
Galiana Winery. I do them.
Which, by the way, folks, if you're out of the area, that's one of the must-visits in our Southern California. Don Galliano, at age 86, passed away 4 months ago. And he was running around right up to the last day overseeing that 4-generation wine family's operation when the... we got another helicopter there.
That's a plane, I think.
Yeah, well, we're in the flight pattern for French Valley Airport.
Yeah.
Here, so, but anyways, we all in that valley there, where the Interstate 10 runs. Not only was it old US, I believe 60, but it was old US 99. I remember with my grandmother when I was late 50s, we'd go out to Palm Springs and we'd be driving, stopping at every little town along the way. Old US 99, and all you could see on either side of the main road was vines for as far as the eye could see. So that valley actually has been farmed with wine grapes since the middle 1800s, for those who don't know. And Galiana Winery goes back all those number of years and has been there for well over a century, and they still make, you can go there and buy jugs of Zinfandel. Yeah, 1 gallon jugs like the old Red Mountain. I think they're still only $14.
Yep, that's their number one seller.
So you do the labels for the classic Galiana Winery.
Yeah,
how about that?
Now
that's kind of a big feather in the hat, is it not?
Yeah, I've been a member there for over a decade.
Yes.
And one day I've been giving in proposals for a while, and then in the label business, when somebody's happy with who they have, they tend not to want to change.
Right.
But I always want to be there and have my card there and just have I appear there.
Right.
So they'll think of me when something goes wrong. So I think it was 3 years ago. I went tasting on a Sunday, and Dominic, his son, said, "Hey, my label guy is just really, pissing me off." I don't know what he said. But it was like, "Can you give me a quote?" So I said, "Yeah, I'd be love to give you a
right
quote."
Right place, right time.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
That's how it works in this business.
Right.
So I said, "That'd be great. I'd love to do it." And I gave him a quote. He gave me some samples, and everything was great. So turned out, and I made the label for his. We'd actually designed those for his son. I forgot his name.
I know they're in the 4 generations going there now.
Luca. His son Luca. So we made a label for the birth of his first son.
Oh, how fun.
Luca
Yes.
Port, yeah. So he loved it. Turned out great. And I kind of get him, get him away from the, because they were still doing the old glue-on labels on some of them.
Oh, God.
So now we're doing all the pressure-sensitive labels.
I'm curious, this is a question which you may or may not know, but with all the years of that being the icon it has been, do they have their own bottling operation
yeah,
there?
They bottle
do?
there.
Okay,
Oh,
I was
yeah.
going to say, because a lot of small places like us, and many here in the Temecula Valley, and even around Southern California, that's way too much energy, time, and expertise, so we bring in those bottling trucks.
Of course, yes.
But some of the bigger, longer lasting ones, and then I would imagine they probably do, just like since we were talking about Oak Mountain and a couple others there, Cougar that you do for, they have their own bottling system,
Yes.
and so they will bottle for other wineries in
Exactly,
the area.
yes.
Because as long as they've been established, I just couldn't imagine. But it's funny, I've gone on tours there, and I do not remember seeing the bottling line, which is why I had to ask the question.
At Cougar?
Yeah. No, at Old Galliano Winery. So,
Oh, no, it's in that big barn.
Is that?
Like where the
Okay.
tasting room is, just, I think, to the north of it is that big barn.
Big barn, yeah.
And it looks like just...
Well, I've been inside and seen their vats of Zinfandel that you could swim in. Literally.
Yeah.
They're like giant swimming pool vats
Yep.
of Zinfandel.
Old
That's how much
Vine Zin.
Old Vine Zin that they grow and
Yeah.
make there. So, and of course, throughout much of Southern California and even up north, there's still people that come and buy the Old Vine Zin fruit that they
absolutely.
produce. It's
Yeah.
all so long established that they dry farm it. So they're just whatever the rain gives.
Yeah, because those
yeah.
vines sometimes go 100, 200 feet deep.
Yeah. I joke and say it's clear down into the Santa Ana River table.
Yeah, probably so.
For those that know Southern California,
Yeah.
they're not far from where the Santa Ana River runs to the end of the empire there.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
So if somebody's in the printing industry or they're working for one of these big companies and they're like, man, I've had it. There's a lot of burgeoning wine regions around all of the United States. I would imagine there's a big demand for, gosh, we need somebody who can produce labels. Why don't you give a little primer on what are some of the things you need to think about if that was something you went, oh my gosh, I'm involved in printing, maybe I could do that.
Well, you have to have a little expertise on
Right.
and knowledge of wine, a little bit, not like a lot, but just
Right.
be familiar with it because you have to know what your customer's looking for. And then there's all kinds of things like the unwind. It's like how the labels are put on the roll.
Right.
There's like 1, 2, 3, and 4. Left off first, right off first, back, bottom off, top off. There's 8 actually, 8 different.
So they got to have some background in printing basics, right?
Pretty much.
Okay.
And you really have to love the industry. It's
Right.
like, that because I do commercial printing as well, but mostly now design works. I have a lot of graphic designers that I contract with, and they do that kind of thing. But the thing I would tell somebody that wants to get into labels is just, you have to develop a passion for it. You have to
Right. Well, it's like the wine industry.
Yeah, you want to you want to give the customers something that will help them sell it, something that will help them describe without words what's in the bottle. Like
Now, and it's funny you mentioned that because, and a number of folks may have picked this up, and if you haven't, it's a recommend by me. But the Barefoot story, which the folks that created that label, and it's interesting, when they launched out, the wine industry was really quite different back in the late 80s, early 90s but they started buying bulk wine from some of the favorite places that they had and thought, gosh, we could create our own label. And it actually was kind of a situation dropped in their lap where they needed to, if I remember the story correctly, where they needed to move this wine out. And they had a connection where they were up in San Leandro when the old grocery chain Lucky's existed. I know because I used to work for Lucky's way back in those days.
I did too. I was a box boy for them.
And so the guy who was the buyer, they went to him and he says, look, here's what you need to do. One, you're going to need a label that at a glance can communicate what you want, and hopefully the label and the logo are the same thing. And they came up with the Barefoot logo and the name. So you don't even need to see the name to know what the name is. And talk about super marketing.
Yeah.
And so those kinds of things enter into the whole strategic aspect of when you're putting together the marketing apparatus. So I just mentioned that because that book is just loaded with a lot of, for people that are thinking about anything in the wine industry. These people, they took this company that they used to do in the garage and sold it for millions and millions of dollars to Gallo Wine, almost a decade ago now. Not to mention what they probably made on their book.
Yeah.
I imagine they're still involved in the wine industry, but maybe sipping it and looking out over the vineyards instead.
Most likely, yes. Yes.
Well, with that being said, what we were just talking about, what about as far as, you already had the company, so it just became kind of an umbrella or an addendum to what you were already doing?
Yeah, and I found out that I enjoyed it a lot. It was great to see your work on a bottle of wine, and, it beats having a meeting, it beats drinking coffee when you can have wine. Right?
Well, that depends, because my guest this last time around created sparkling coffee in a can that is almost like beer. And
really?
It's quite an intriguing different drink, especially for coffee lovers, because there's a lot of similarities between coffee and wine, all the nuances and differences, and if you have a passion for it, it's like you got to explore every little dimension of it. So,
absolutely, yeah.
So let's talk about here in particularly where you primarily focus is Southern California. Are you taking any more clients at this point in time?
I'll never turn a new client down.
Oh, okay.
I've had clients from San Diego out to Malibu, and you're talking about the bottling truck. It was called Mission Bottling,
right?
And that was a friend of mine, Clark, was one of the owners. I knew him from several years, so he would always give me leads and say, "Well, these good bottles, they don't know where to get labels." So he would give me a call. I would call him up. My only celebrity customer was Emilio Estevez.
Oh yeah.
I was actually in Mexico. I was in.
Oh really?
Yeah, I was in Mexico. I think where was I? I was in Rosarita, and no reception at all, and sitting there, and from where we stayed and went down to the beach, there was only a little spot on a rock that you would get reception. So I get a voicemail. I check my phone. He says, "Hi, this is Emilio Estevez."
You're like, okay, who's calling me?
I'm
joking.
I'm going, yeah, right. So he goes, "Yeah, Clark from Mission Valley told me that you do labels and all this." And I go, "Okay, great." So I'm in Mexico and I have no reception, and I try to call him back, and it just was a nightmare. 2 or 3, and then there was no roaming, so
right.
Phone calls cost me like $50 a piece.
Back in the day.
Yeah,
yes.
Back in the day, and but ended up I did his one and only label run for him.
How about that?
Very
good.
Yeah. So it turned out great. Yeah.
So if we've got some bright lights going off in folks' heads right now, it's like, oh my gosh, I've got a little home, winemaking operation. Which, by the way, people know this. I love to share it. I never fail every show if I can to tell you about the Small Wine Growers Association, which is we used to call Southern California, and then we started by calling Temecula. And anyways, it's anybody who can get here, okay, on the second Monday of every month at the Wilson Creek Grand Ballroom. If you want to farm wine grapes, that's what we're all about. Of course, everybody shows up with a bottle of wine to share at their table. And we usually end up with 60 to 100 folks all growing grapes somewhere in Southern California. They come from all over the place. I'm thinking that might be it.
That's where I saw you.
That would be, yes.
I was with John Land. I don't know if you know him. He's a tree guy.
Yeah, because we were saying we met before and we did that. What I called you.
We were on the table way at the end. But I went to that meeting just because he wanted to get his wine because he makes it at Frangipani. So he wanted to present it and have tasted it, and it was really good.
So I'm setting the stage there, saying, boy, if you're thinking, man, two things. I either got something I'd like to put labels, because there's a lot of custom label kind of situations. People I have a friend who has a bed and breakfast, and they have become a licensed bonded winery, but they're not going out into the marketplace. They're making just enough wine to serve their guests at the bed and breakfast from the vines on their property, as well as buying fruit from other areas. Obviously, they need labels. Okay. And then when we're talking about that association with that group, I know, like we were talking about, there are a lot of people out there. It's like, man, if I went bigger, where do I go? So I'm kind of setting the stage there. So if people were actually in a situation where I know a winery that happened to drop a line to me saying, do you know where I could get labels printed? So I mean, it's crazy for us to talk all about this and your company and not give you a chance to tell folks how to get a hold of you and, maybe take advantage of your expertise you bring from your time in the industry.
I can give you my email, phone number.
Sure, fire it away.
All right. Email is r66printing@gmail.com. Phone number is 909-969-3980. Paul Van Olden. And just let me know what you need, and because I do a lot of small, short-run labels for independent people. And, I never turn anything down, even though, no matter how smart it is, because how small it is, because you never know it's going to turn into something big.
So talk about turning into something big. This is a wild, crazy thing that just pinged in my head. It's so like, could you imagine an association of wine label makers? I'm only saying that because my lovely wife and I are getting ready to take a trip to New York with our little travel trailer. And we're going to leave just before Thanksgiving and come back the first part of December. And we're going to go down to Texas wine country. And I'm just thinking, when I was mentioning before, there could be, there's burgeoning new wine countries emerging all over the United States. There could be more Paul Van Oldens out there.
Yeah, there could be. Yeah, definitely.
So hopefully any of the things we've shared here could be of help in the situation. I have just, Paul, I want to say thank you because I have always been fascinated by this dimension of the industry. Anybody who's followed me over the years with my Wine Country Talk radio show, I've seemed to have tackled every dimension of the industry. And this is one that I'd yet to get a chance to do. So this was kind of special, especially, yes, hold on, get your glass again, because you can't do this ever, folks, without sipping some wine at the same time.
That's right.
And I have to tell you another thank you, because this, with the Spill the Wine Show podcast, yes, a lot of this is very serendipitous, because a young gentleman I ran into, we're friends of sorts, and he had said, gosh, have you talked to Paul, who's always over there at Cougar? He's got that company that makes labels for wine. And I went, wait a minute. We've met before. I got to call this guy. So that's what led to us sitting here
on
a lovely incredible afternoon, with the exception that we're right at rush time, and people who know the way in and out of the backside of our Temecula Valley by Lake Skinner, you can hear the traffic going by in the background. Usually it's pretty quiet, though, and the vines don't seem to mind, since they've given up all their ghosts now. So we've finished all the harvesting of 8 different varieties of grapes here at Chapin Family Vineyards. Paul, thank you once again. It's the Spill the Wine Show podcast. I want to remind everybody, every week, if you're in Southern California, anywhere from San Diego to just about Ventura and almost out to Las Vegas, AM 830, the Big Angels baseball flagship station. The studios are actually in the Angels baseball complex there. My buddy Peter Dills, every Sunday from 5 p.m. to 6 p.m. It's the Dining with Dills show if you want to know anything about a great restaurant or great food. But if you also want to catch a little snippet of a preview of the Spill the Wine show, that's where you tune in also, because he hosts me the tail end of his show every week. And coming up here, since this is September 2nd when we're actually recording, your little segment, we're going to do a 7-minute segment and pop that in this coming weekend. So just
Great.
A little preview. I think the time this gets edited and put online, that'll be a fait of complete. But that's all right. They can punch us up anytime they want to listen.
That's right.
Paul, once again, thank you so much. It's the Spill the Wine Show podcast. We thank you all for coming and joining us, and we'll talk to you next time.